Okay, good afternoon. My name is Michael Peil, and I am the Executive Director of the International Law Students Association, which, if you've heard of it, is probably because we run the Philip C. Jessup International Law Moot Court Competition, which many of you, from talking to you over the last 3 days, are either participating in or are alumni of, or have coached or have heard of. ILSA is also one of the co-sponsors of this panel on pathways to employment in international law. We're delighted. This is, of course, for many of you where the rubber hits the road. We've had all sorts of wonderful, deep conversation over the last 2.5 days about various important topics in international law and international practice. But if you can't get the jobs and get someone to pay you to do those things, all of that sort of falls flat. So I would like to thank the American branch for inviting us to hold this panel. You are the future members of the American branch, especially if we can find you gainful employment in international practice. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, the International Law Section of the American Bar Association and the Young Members Group of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. A word on the section. As far as getting jobs in international law, and we'll hear how broad that term is from our very diverse panel, you're already doing the right thing. Attending events like this, networking, meeting the people who are doing what you want to be doing is an important facet of getting that first job in international practice. And another very, very important one is joining organizations like the ABA's section on international law. Quite frankly, from your perspective, these are target-rich environments. You should be volunteering to, we have seats in the jury box. If you'd like to come sit in the jury box, we've got seats over here as well. We'll do this theater in the round. The ABA section and organizations like it provide ample opportunities for students to work with practitioners, to get one-on-one mentorship, to contribute to international legal scholarship, to get your name out there. And as you're going to hear in many different veins from our 4 august speakers today, that's really what it's about when you are finishing your first law degree or finishing your first or second or third LLM or your 4th LLM, at least one case in the room. So you're already on the right track, and I hope that this panel can help put some of the other dots together. We have a fantastic panel this afternoon who will try to demystify the opportunities for careers in international law and how best to position yourself as a young or nascent lawyer for those opportunities. So let's jump right in. Our first speaker is Alexander Gudko. Alex is an associate at Covington and Burling here in New York, where he specializes in international commercial and investor state arbitration. He focuses on disputes arising in the energy, life sciences, and technology industries. Alex completed his legal education and practiced law in Ukraine. He's earned Master of Laws degrees from Stockholm University in Sweden and from NYU Law School here in New York. Alex, please get us started.
Very much, Michael, for the introduction, and I'd like to thank the organizers. I remember the days when I was a student attending this conference. I always thought highly of this conference. It was always thought-provoking and useful for me. I met a lot of practitioners, people who are now colleagues and friends. So thank you all very much for coming. And this is the last panel of the day. We're very pleased sitting here to see that we have a full room. So we're happy to be here. I'm going to tell you my story and my pathway to employment in international law, and then I'm going to share some tips based on my experience. But probably what's important to state in the beginning is that each story is unique, and you have to write your own story. I work with a lot of colleagues who have a somewhat similar background, and each of them found that dream job that they wanted in their own way. So all of the tips that you go into here today, you have to find a good combination that is going to work for you, for your background, for your skills. So As Michael said, I started to practice law originally in Ukraine, which is a civil country. And I started to work early as a student trainee. And at that time, I thought that I was going to practice corporate law. And boy, was I wrong about that. After starting my career quite early as a student trainee, I very quickly gravitated towards dispute resolution and the adversarial process. I knew that that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my career. So what I did was I participated in the VISMUD, International Commercial Arbitration, which is very famous, and I hope most of you know what that competition is. And after that experience, I was invited to apply to an LM program at Stockholm University in Sweden. And at that time, international students did not have to pay tuition for that LM program. Unfortunately, 2 years after I graduated, I think that, that is no longer the case. I think it's no longer the case today. So I was not expecting to get in. At that time, I haven't applied anywhere else. I just wanted to see how the process worked. And somehow I got in and I got exposed to this incredible world of international arbitration. And ever since then, as I say, I was infected with that virus, which, I think it's a very pleasant virus to have. It keeps guiding me every day. And when I have a tough period at work, when it's, sleep deprivation or you're dealing with other issues, I ask myself, well, why am I doing all of that? And I just remember that, it was what inspired me. It was my passion from the beginning, and I just followed that passion. So after completing my studies, I returned to Ukraine. I practiced in an international law firm, but a lot of what you can do in the field while you're an associate in a country like Ukraine, you either work as local counsel and you cooperate with a bigger international law firm abroad. Your partner may be an expert in the case on Ukrainian law, for example, you assist that partner, or you handle your own arbitrations, which are typically smaller cases with a seat in Ukraine or the region. And I wanted to do more. I wanted to join teams that can actually represent big parties and big arbitrations. I was always fascinated with the oil and gas industry, and I knew how arbitration is a very important dispute resolution mechanism for that industry. I also, while in Stockholm, I participated in Frankfurt Investment Arbitration Moot. It's one of the few moots out there who focus on investor-state arbitration, and that's probably where my biggest passion lies until today. I found it absolutely fascinating that you can sue sovereign states on behalf of private individuals. And that's what inspired me to pursue a career in this field. So after working in Ukraine for a number of years, I moved to the United States. And that is a sort of a kamikaze move, because as a lawyer, once you move out of your jurisdiction, your value drops close to zero. Of course, you have some skills that you bring with you, you have your experiences, but in a sense, you're starting from scratch. And that's what I had to learn the hard way, I guess. So I focused my studies at NYU on international investment law, but at the same time, I also took classes that I thought were useful. And at the time, I knew that white collar and investigations practice was booming, and the budgets in that practice group were much bigger. There were bigger teams working on cases. There were investigations, FCPA investigations, which stands for Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and a number of other sanctions violations, antitrust law violations. That was a booming practice at the time. And I knew that my foreign language skills could help me get a role in that area of law that I had zero experience doing while in Ukraine. So I also tried to focus on that. So after graduating from NYU and passing the bar, I continued to pursue job opportunities, but my dream job was not there waiting for me. So after graduating, I did not have a place to work. I already established certain relationships, but they did not result in a job that I came here to get. So what did I do next? I tried to stay on top of all the developments and get the job that I could at the time. I focused on what I said, white collar investigations. That turned out to be my very first job as a contract attorney for one of the big law firms, where my language skills were, very useful at the time. I also did research for one of the international arbitrators based in DC for very little money, but that, I got more experience from that, and I got someone who, let's say, could serve as a mentor and who could provide a letter of recommendation or otherwise guide me through the field. I also when I passed the bar and could practice law in New York, I kept in touch with my existing network of friends. And one of my friends contacted me one day and he said, well, I work for this company and we have an ICDR arbitration with a seat in New York. Would you like to get involved? And I'm like, yes, exactly. That's the call I was waiting for. So before I was able to secure my position with a big law firm, and that was important for me personally, because in investor state arbitration, that's pretty much where you have to go in order to do that type of work. It's the big law firms that represent states and investors predominantly. I think that changes with time. I think by now it's becoming more diverse. There are a lot of arbitration boutiques out there, but at the time that was important for me to get there. So let me give you a couple of tips based on my experience. And my experience again is of a LLM student who did not get a JD in the US. And the system, the recruiting system here, if you're looking to practice international law in the US, is geared towards hiring JDs. And I know that we have a mixed audience, so I'm going to try to keep it relevant for everybody. The easiest way to get into big law, in my opinion, is through a summer associate program. And to get that place, you need to be a JD student. At the time, I thought that I did not have the 3 years and I did not have the money to fund that program. But I think, and with hindsight, that's something that more international students should consider to the extent they can make it happen, they can afford it, both in terms of cost and time. Hiring for pretty much everyone else is exclusively need-based. You need to feel some niche, you need to satisfy certain demand, be it your language skills or your background or something else, and you need to be useful. You need to ask yourself, what can I bring to the table? How can I offer something? Because after all, this is the job market. The market is the key word. No one hires you because you're a nice guy or girl. You need to be able to justify the cost. And one interesting analogy I discussed with one of the students at this conference is that at the time, it was cheaper to hire a whole, let's say, a department with several lawyers in a local law firm in Ukraine than to pay one associate salary to me. So that's sort of what we are up against when as international students, we come here and we want to practice the law. I think the key to finding the job for me was cultivating relationships. And I encourage you to do that. It's not just coming to a conference, meeting someone, and then following up and sending them a resume once. You need to find those people that do the work that you want to do. For arbitration practitioners, there's this resource called Global Arbitration or Investment Arbitration Reporter, and those other websites where you can track what law firms and what lawyers do the work that you want to do. It's all out there. It's all published. You need to do your research. You need to find the people that do the work that you want to do, and you need to make yourself useful. You need to meet them and try to cultivate the relationship. That's what led me to the role that I have today. I attended, as you are attending here today, I attended the conference on energy arbitration in Houston. And that's where I saw a colleague of mine from a law firm I worked for in Ukraine was a partner from the London office, who basically told me that, well, I didn't expect to see it here. Why don't you reach out to my colleague? And that's how I got to meet one of my current partners and people who I work with on a daily basis. It's important to be persistent, but not to be annoying. Because I heard it from someone who on a similar panel that time moves differently when you're with the job in a law firm comparing to when you're without a job outside one. You need to understand that people are very busy, the inboxes are incredibly busy, and you need to be realistic about what you can get from people. And I think that, especially nowadays when everyone's used to meeting over Zoom, Teams, and otherwise remote networking, I think asking a person to devote 15 or 20 minutes of their time to have coffee, either virtually or in person, if you're visiting that city or town, I think it's a very reasonable thing to do, and I personally do it. You have to be proactive and use all the resources available. Those moods that I mentioned, like Jessup, there are so many of them. That's where you hone the skills that you need in the field, be it international arbitration or pretty much any other area in international. It's very important to write well, and if you cannot get the job that you want right away, you need to position yourself and make a plan of how you're going to get there in a certain number of years. I would like to here refer to famous song by Rolling Stones, you can't always get what you want, but I think you know how that goes, right? And it ends with, well, if you try sometime, you'll find that you get what you need. It's important to be patient and position yourself and see yourself where you're going to be in 3 to 5, 7 years. Get the job that you can, even if it's not that dream job, and try to work on the skills that you're going to need. Most advocacy that we do on a daily basis is written advocacy. We write letters, briefs, most of it. There's also obviously oral advocacy, analytical thinking. All of those skills, you can practice that you can work on those skills having many different roles. So I guess I'll be wrapping up and I'll just end with an inspirational phrase. There's no quit in New York. I'm a fan of New York Rangers, and that's their slogan now. So I hope that that's what the mindset that you're going to leave this room with today, and that you're going to continue to be persistent about pursuing your dream career, and that you'll be not giving up and using all the resources that are at your disposal to get there. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Labi. I'm an associate in the Winston Strawn office in London. Like Alex, I'm very international, which is fitting, I think, for this weekend. But apologies that my experience isn't completely tailored to the American market. But I'm delighted to be here today. I think this gavel in front of me is a symbol of how different our legal systems are. And if things get rowdy, I know how to control the room. So I'm very excited. As I said, I'm senior associate at Winston. I specialize in commercial international arbitration. The thing that I really love about my job is that I work on lots of different cases which have a fact pattern that is often to do with different jurisdictions. So I worked on cases that concern Kazakhstan, Nigeria, and even Saudi Arabia, and conducted witness interviews in Saudi Arabia, which, as a woman, it was quite a daunting experience, and one that I never expected to have. But I think the exciting thing about going to places like that is that you are surprised, and actually, in a business setting, everyone treats me with absolute respect and decorum, and I felt very welcome. And so I think that's those kinds of experiences are probably why you're in the room today and why you're so interested, I hope, in a career in international law. I think my top tip to everyone in the room is to not be too rigid about your career plan. It's great to have an intention, but you don't, it's very difficult to know what you want to do before you even start doing it. Like Alex said, he wanted to be a corporate lawyer. I actually wanted to be a fashion designer when I was younger. And I then went to Central St Martin's, which is an art school that Stella McCartney went to and had Kate Moss and Naomi Campbell in her final show, which actually did not happen with me. But you know, after doing it, I realised actually I don't want to do that. I'd rather do something more academic. And again, oh sorry. Can everyone hear me better now? Yeah. Great. Apologies for deafening everyone in the room. And again, when I studied law, I thought I wanted to do intellectual property. And so a lot of the courses that I did at law school were really interrogating intellectual property. And part of the reason that I went to Winston actually was because I went to an event sort of like this in my law school where Winston presented about this case that Peil and Chobani, which is a passing off case based on the champagne cases, where Greek yogurt had to be made in Greece in order to be considered Greek yogurt, which I thought was fascinating. And so I was really interested in this case. And that's part of the reason which led me to Winston. But then when I got to Winston, I was actually working on the case because it went up to the Court of Appeal. I realised that a lot of the intellectual property cases they had were much more technical, and actually someone with a more technical and scientific background might be better suited to doing cases like that. So I kind of pivoted and did a lot more cases that were more commercial. I did investigations as well. You know, as I started doing it, I realized that commercial arbitration was, you know, much more something that I was interested in. And I didn't even know about it when I was at law school, really. It just wasn't really covered. So what I'd say is, you know, at law school, do classes that really interest you, and hopefully you'll do better in them, and your transcripts will really show that. And I think certainly when I was applying that was important to have good transcripts that really focus on that. Yeah, I think in terms of how it works in the UK, I mean, it's very different to America with the level of depth that you will get into before your career starts. But essentially you do 1 year converting a non-law degree into a law degree, and then you do another year, which is a very kind of practical course, which teaches you how to write procedural documents in a civil litigation or complete property transaction. So I think you probably have a bit more choice in terms of the courses that you can do in the US, which I think you should take full advantage of. It sounds really fascinating. And I think an issue that Alex touched on is to focus on the skills you really need as a lawyer. As a disputes lawyer, we spend a lot of time writing. If I see an application or a resume that isn't written well, then yeah, I mean, we're going to start reading it. You know, it's really important to make sure that it's a well-written document. And I think in terms of interview, you really cannot be prepared enough in terms of interview questions. I myself have written a list of all interview questions that I thought might be asked, and I've written out, you know, answers. And I think the key is to be very succinct and to answer the question you're actually being asked in an interview. Because as lawyers, we have to answer our clients' commercial questions. We don't get to answer whatever topic might interest us. So if I'm interviewing someone that's talking, you know, a complete tangent to my question, it's not very impressive. So you really want to be focused and targeted. In terms of what you can do in terms of making yourself stand out, I think it's great that you're here giving up your weekend attending an international conference like this. I think, yeah, the type of things that I did, getting really interested in a case and talking to the firms that you're being interviewed at about particular work that they're doing. That's going further than just looking at their website and telling them how many people are employed in their offices overall, which I think is something that we're not as law firms particularly interested in. So I think the more steps you can take to show that you're really you've researched the firm, that's important because that's a skill that we use as lawyers, particularly junior lawyers, who are doing research. So I want to know that someone has gone the extra mile because ultimately if they're in my team, I want them to do that every day of the job. So I think it's just kind of analysing those skills that you'll need as a junior lawyer and demonstrating them at the interview in the application process.
Thank you, Suzanne. First speaker coming from a very different background is David Satnarine. David is special counsel for immigrant affairs at the Burling DA's office here in New York. Prior to joining the DA's office, he was presidential management fellow at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and clerk at the Office of the Attorney General for the District of Columbia. He earned his bachelor's degree at NYU, and then we've got a joint master's in international relations and JD degree from American University in Washington. David? And I'm sorry, Suzanne, for not getting your introduction.
Oh, hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you. So this is my first time actually being at this wonderful law school and seeing the great facilities here. And I can tell you that it's a great opportunity to just be here for yourself and for myself to even speak to you and to engage with this audience. So a little bit about myself. I'm an extremely non-traditional lawyer. I'm a non-traditional lawyer in my profession. My road to law school and to becoming a lawyer is extremely non-traditional. I grew up in New York City. I never thought I would practice any type of immigration law. I'm an immigrant myself. I'm from Guyana. I can tell you that I probably knew a lot about asylum law at 10 years old from the deli owner across the street, or I would say the bodega owner across the street that I grew up from. But growing up in the way that I grew up, the government wasn't the good guy. And I never thought that I would see myself on the government side, and I've mostly been a government lawyer my entire career. I ended up dropping out of high school, but the thing that really brought me to law was in undergrad, I learned about this case called Korematsu v. United States. And I don't know if you guys know Korematsu, and Korematsu is a case about Japanese internment in the United States during World War II. And I actually did some time in the military, and after learning about that case, and I learned about that case in undergrad before law school, it was one of the most shocking legal cases I've ever read, because I felt like even though as a soldier I led for this country, I was still a second-class citizen no matter what. And I wanted to change that. And I wanted to do something about that. So I wrote about that in my law school applications. And in undergrad, I was a communications major. I had every intent on being a journalist. But there was something about that case that really brought a passion inside of me that I wanted to work to see the end of that. Thankfully, it only happened in one line. I think a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court firmly overruled it. But it's laid on our books for a long time. And it was very much part of the Patriot Act and the events after September 11th. Now, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because in a city like New York, and especially a borough like Brooklyn, the borough that my office represents, international issues are local issues. While I was growing up in New York City, I know a lot of people that have gotten into trouble with immigration law and criminal justice system. And I don't know if any of you have ever practiced immigration law. There are devastating consequences for very low level criminal justice contacts for someone if they're a non-citizen. So for instance, for a long time, if you jumped a turnstile, which you probably see a lot of people doing nowadays, that could get you deported from this country, even if you've been here 20, 30 years. Low-level marijuana possession, something that is legal in New York, can still get someone deported for 20, that's been a resident of this country 20 or 30 years. I make no, no hesitation about it. Immigration law is very harsh. So primarily what I do in the district attorney's office, I do many different things, but one of the things I do is I'm responsible for meeting the needs of our immigrant population in Brooklyn, in the criminal justice system. So what does that look like? It takes many different shapes, it takes many different forms. Primarily I was brought on to what we call detangle the criminal justice system and the harsh immigration system that we have in the United States. We call it a collateral consequence plea policy, where when we're pursuing disposition on cases for someone that is a chronic drug addict, that we see that person as, that's not a criminal justice issue, that's a health issue. And that's someone that doesn't need incarceration because, what's that saying? Doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity. That is not going to solve a chronic addiction issue. What that person needs is services. So I look at diversion programs, and I look at a broad area of programs that we can offer people that are accountability methods for crimes. Of course, public safety is still our first focus, but we look at different ways of holding people accountable for crimes that are not going to lead to devastating, destabilizing consequences, whether you're an immigrant, non-immigrant, whatever the case. That's primarily the work that I do in the DA's office in terms of plea bargaining. I do a lot of litigation in terms of protecting immigrant rights in New York City. One particular case that I was very proud to work on was, for the first time in, I think, in the history of the United States, the district attorney's office sued the federal government. We sued the federal government because in 2018, we saw blanket ICE enforcement in and around New York City courthouses, where people would go to court and they would get arrested by ICE. It was a witness, it was a victim, it was a defendant, it didn't matter. And I was the person that would sit down and look at a person that's a victim of a heinous sexual assault. And they would say, David, I want to testify, but I'm afraid to go to court. If I go to court, they'll get, what can you do to protect me? And I had no answer for that person at that time. And ultimately, there were some cases that we felt that these were horrible people, and we don't, jail is the last resort in our office, but some people, we do feel some crimes and the severity of some crimes do deserve jail. And we couldn't hold that person accountable because we couldn't prove our case. So what we did in 2019, we sued ICE for them to stop the behavior of arresting people in courthouses. We felt like it destabilized justice, it harmed public safety, it was a mockery of our own local justice system, and we won that suit. The first time it was ever brought by a district attorney's office, and we're 1-0 against that. We hope we never have to do it again. It ultimately, and then the other thing that we deal with in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, because in Brooklyn, almost 50% of the population is foreign born. So all these international issues, Ukraine, especially being one of them, because Brooklyn has the largest Ukrainian population outside of Ukraine in the United States. These are local issues for us. We did if you're familiar with something called a temporary protected status clinic back in April, or it was actually late May, when I'm gonna just call it, I don't know why this is sometimes controversial, Putin's illegal war in Ukraine sent thousands and thousands of people to the shores of the United States. And we said, we're gonna make Brooklyn a safe haven because we want to make sure that we can help people become productive members of society while they're here, however long they want to be here. We're going to do all that we can. When Governor Abbott of Texas started busing people to New York City from the border, to date 21,000 since April, 40% of those people ended up in Brooklyn shelters. We met their need, and we went to various shelters and hosted legal clinics to connect them with pro bono legal services so they can normalize their status as best as they can, or figure out where they are in the immigration process. Get them healthcare, try to get them on their feet as best as we can. Because in a borough like Brooklyn, like I said, when you deal with the migration issues and, you know, I'm a proud immigrant and most people in Brooklyn are proud immigrants. Those are local issues and local public safety issues. So that is a very non-traditional way of being a prosecutor, but it is still something I'm very proud to do. And I can tell you before that, I was an asylum officer in the United States government. I love that job. And I think one thing to keep in mind is and I'm tying this into like, where do you go in your career? So I got that job as part of something called the Presidential Management Fellowship. So when people think about working for the government and being a lawyer, they think DOJ honors program. But that's not the only honors program in federal government. There are many different honors programs. And one of the things that I loved about the Presidential Management Fellowship program is that it's not limited to just DOJ. You can go virtually to any government agency in that program. A lot of people find a home in the State Department through that program. I personally took asylum law in my last semester of law school. I was a part-time student. It was the only thing that fit my schedule. I did not want to take that class. But then I fell in love. I absolutely fell in love with it. And part of that program was the director of USCIS coming to talk to our class saying, we need lawyers as asylum officers. And there's this Presidential Management Fellowship program. That's a great way to become an asylum officer. Please do that. And I've got to say that being an asylum officer under that program, I got to travel the world as an asylum officer and a refugee officer. It was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had in my entire life. You've got to see international issues right at the door where they occur. You got to see them when they arrive in the United States. And in a lot of ways, the power of an asylum officer is unrivaled anywhere else in government. When you decide as an asylum officer, yes, you are an asylee. Yes, you are a refugee. There's no one appealing your decision. There's no judge. There is your decision and your decision to grant mercy to someone that is life-changing. So I encourage you, if you do, are attracted to a world of public service or government service, there are many places in the government that you can go that we're not always the bad guys. There was another part of work that I did when I was a lawyer for the Department of Homeland Security in the General Counsel Division. I was in the National Security Law Division. Did a lot of work chasing with the Human Rights War Crime Center and chasing people that committed heinous war crimes overseas and lied on their applications. We investigated them to figure out who they are, what they did, and to try to hold them accountable if we could. I did a lot of work with investigating something called genocidaires from Rwanda. Another part of that work was involved chasing terrorists or suspected terrorists. That work was rather interesting, but I got to say, my best advice to you is to stay true to your conviction, because as much as I did enjoy the work as an asylum officer, in 2017, when Trump instituted a Muslim ban, I was based in DC at that point. I flew to New York. Queens is my home. I know JFK really well. I know all the back roads. I went to the protest. I didn't care that I had an asylum officer badge. I was ready to quit on the spot. I was very fortunate to find a job like a month later in the DA's office doing the work that I do now. But I would say one thing that I can say to all of you, stay true to your convictions, ride them as best as you can. It will take you far.
Thank you, David. Our final speaker for this round, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the crowd, is Jess Peake. Jess is the Assistant Director of the Promise Institute for Human Rights and the Director of International and Comparative Law Programming at UCLA School of Law, where she also teaches courses on human rights and war crime digital investigations, the law of war, and the war on terror. She earned her LLB from the University of Sheffield in the United Kingdom and LLM degrees from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands and from the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. Jess?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the organizers. And I'm so glad to see so many of you sticking this out till almost 5 p.m. on Saturday. Thank you for being here. So what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about me and sort of some of the positions that I've held, and then I'll give you maybe some ways that you can think about career searching in the international law space. So as Michael just said, I'm from the UK originally, and I got my undergraduate degree. We do undergraduate degrees in law in England. My degree was in European, International, and Comparative law. And going into that, I always knew that I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. And what I didn't really know was what it meant to be a human rights lawyer. And so in England, it's very much structured extremely differently than the US law school system. You don't do as many summer internships, there are not as many opportunities to really figure out what different career paths look like. So immediately after finishing my undergraduate law degree, I went to Leiden in the Netherlands, which is one of the oldest universities in the Netherlands, to study public international law. And I was really fortunate to learn from, a lot of very eminent characters in public international law, being located right next to The Hague. And one really important thing that I did while I was at Leiden was compete in the Jessup competition. So Michael spoke a little bit about that earlier. And it was a fantastic experience because doing these big international law competitions, you really get to just seek yourself in international law and think about it very practically for almost an entire year. And we won our national rounds. We went to DC, and I've been involved in the Jessup competition ever since. I'm now on the board with Michael. I've judged at the international rounds for the past almost 15 years, I think, and I've had the opportunity to travel to a lot of different countries to judge national rounds through Jessup. And so either participating as a student now or getting involved with the Jessup as a coach or a judge is a really, really fantastic networking opportunity generally. After I finished at Leiden, I went to the Security Council in New York for an internship. And so I was here at HQ with the Security Council just for a summer, but it was a really incredible experience because I was able to sit in on Security Council sessions, be in working groups, do some brainstorming around different Security Council agenda items. And then I moved from there to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague. And there I worked in prosecution, doing genocide and war crimes work as a very baby junior lawyer on a giant case with about 60 other lawyers. But it was, again, a really fantastic experience because I had excellent supervision and was very much just willing to do anything that they offered me. And I think that's one piece of advice that I would give you to take away is don't think that anything's beneath you when you're doing these internship positions, right? I know it can sometimes be tempting to think like, I'm in law school and I shouldn't have to be doing this like really boring reading through documents work. That's absolutely why you're there. And that's how you learn the skills. And that's also how you show people that you're willing to do the work, right? So just as you're in these positions, really think about sort of how you can make yourself stand out. From there, I went to the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia. I worked in the defense team. It was a really interesting counterpoint to doing prosecution work at the ICTY. Defense work in international criminal law is obviously challenging because you are defending people who are accused of atrocious crimes. But it's also extremely interesting work because you are thinking about fair trial issues and really, well, with the Cambodian court, at least we were thinking about some really novel issues because I was there right at the beginning when the cases were just getting off the ground. And so there were a lot of really interesting legal questions that needed to be dealt with. While I was in Cambodia, I was accepted to Penn with a full scholarship to do a second LLM. And so nobody turns down free school. So I came to the US to do an LLM in human rights at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I thought I would be here in the US for 9 months, and I've been here for 14 years. So sometimes things don't go the way you think. But I did my LLM in human rights, and then I took the New York bar. And then I actually enrolled in an SJD program, a PhD in law, to do research on international criminal procedure. That was the wrong choice for me. I ultimately did not complete my SJD, and I can certainly talk about that in Q&A if you're interested. But it did give me the opportunity to do more engaged research in an area of law that I was interested in. And also it allowed me to remain in the United States, which I guess had turned into being my goal. And so at the same time as doing SJD research, I also moved to New York and I ran a small women's rights nonprofit here in the city. Well, located here in the city, but actually doing women's empowerment work in East Africa. And so I was sort of traveling back and forth between New York and Tanzania primarily, but Kenya too. for about a year or so, and then I was also doing a little bit of immigration volunteer work on the side. So UNT visa cases with a small immigration nonprofit in Philadelphia, actually. From there, I moved to Los Angeles to do some research at UCLA. I was still involved in my SJD program at this time, and there was a faculty member at UCLA that I was really interested to go work with. So I did continue that research, and then they were looking for somebody to run the International and Comparative Law program, and I was like, oh, that's me. I would really like to do that. And so I did, and it was very much the right place at the right time kind of opportunity. But from UCLA, I've really been able to do like a lot of tremendous work. So as Michael mentioned, I teach a variety of classes in international law, international humanitarian law. This year I'm teaching a new class on human rights and war crimes, digital investigations. And I've also been able to engage students in a ton of different research projects with various international organizations. And so we've done research developing curricula for the International Committee of the Red Cross with a group of students. We've partnered with Civitas Maxima, which is a universal jurisdiction organization based in Geneva. We've done partnerships with UN High Commissioner for Refugees, various special procedures, mandate holders from out of UN HCR in Geneva too. And so through this, I really try and help my students think about what they want to do in international law and how they can get there, right? Because I think for those US law students in the room, if you are going to law school and you want to do domestic work, the pipelines to doing that are very clear, right? You're going to big law, it's clear what you do. You're going to do a judicial clerkship, it's very clear what you want to do. Public interest, it's pretty clear what you want to do. There are all of these like very defined pathways. International law is completely different. Those pathways do not exist in the same way that they do domestically. There are no sort of big recruiting drives to many of these big international organizations at any certain periods of time. And so what that means is you have to be really entrepreneurial. You have to figure out where the organizations are that you're interested in and figure out ways to try and engage with them. So that might be through pro bono projects within the law schools supervised by faculty members. I do this with tons of my students all the time. That might be through contacting them and asking them, you know, do they take summer fellows? Do they take externs? Are there ways that you can begin to develop these relationships in law school? And this is again where you really need to, if you get these opportunities, be there and be doing really good work and really pushing the boundaries of asking for more and more responsibility and better quality work, because that's really what's going to make you stand out. So you do really need this entrepreneurial spirit, I would say, to find careers in international law and human rights. The second thing that I think you really need is flexibility. Both in terms of the substantive area that you're interested in, but also in terms of location. One thing that I benefited from tremendously early in my career was that I was open to moving anywhere, like literally anywhere. And I made that very known to people. And so that's why I got these job opportunities, I think, because I was like in networks of people and I was doing good work and also was making it known that, yeah, if you gave me a job, I would move to Cambodia, no problem. And it's really easy to do that when you're young, right? It becomes much more difficult to do that when you have a family, when you have responsibilities. And obviously for US students, particularly law school ones, can be very problematic, that too. But as far as you can be flexible, do. And as far as you can say yes to things, say yes. Opportunities are going to present themselves all the time, and maybe it's not exactly what you think you want to do, but say yes anyway, as long as you have the time and you can sort of devote enough capacity to doing whatever it is well. Because you don't know where that thing is going to lead, right? You don't know who you're going to meet. Maybe you'll find an area of law that you didn't even know existed, and you'll fall in love with it. And if you don't put yourself in that position to say yes to things, you might never really get that opportunity. In terms of in law school, like what you can do right now for those of you who are in law school, and even the younger professionals in the room who maybe are in their first or second job, I think getting to know the people around you, whether they be your colleagues in law school, so your fellow students, your professors, people that you're working with, because these people are your network, right? Networking is this kind of like evil-ish sounding concept. But actually it's really fun. If you can just be genuinely interested in people, people love to talk about themselves. And so that's a way to start building your network, right? Go to your professor's office hours, ask them about their work, ask them about their research, tell them who you are, tell them what you're interested in, and ask them if they have suggestions of what you should be doing. Do the same with your friends and classmates. Everybody comes to law school with really, really different experiences, and you're going to be in a classroom with people who've already done things that you might find really, really interesting. So have these conversations, you know, reach out to people. As somebody else said, most people are going to give you 15 minutes, right? If you send an email just saying like, hey, I'm really interested in your work, I would love to have a coffee with you for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, just hear about what you do. Most people are genuinely going to say yes to that. Take a wide variety of classes. Do not just take the classes that you think you're interested in, because you don't know what you're interested in yet, because you're not going to know. I'm constantly sitting in classes with my colleagues now, even though I've been in academia for 9 years, and I learn new things and I think about interesting avenues to explore. And law school is the time to do that, right? You have all of these opportunities to take all of these classes, go to all of these different events that you might not otherwise have access to. Go to all of them as far as you can. Often you're going to get free lunch, so that helps too. And you're just going to learn about different fields of practice, and you're going to meet different people, which is again building this network, which is really going to be very crucial as we move forward in the same career. So in terms of thinking about jobs, either externships, internships, postgraduate positions, I always tell my students to think about 3 different buckets of things, right? So you've got the subject matter of a job. Maybe you're interested in international trade or international criminal law or dispute settlement or arbitration, refugee law, whatever it is, that substantive subject matter area is one bucket of things. Second, you have the type of practice you're interested in, right? So maybe it's litigation, maybe it's advocacy, maybe it's policy making, maybe it's some kind of direct legal services. Figure out what you like and what you don't like. And the way you figure out that is by doing a variety of courses and talking to a variety of different people. Because that second bucket is another thing to consider. And then the third bucket is location, right? Maybe you are totally open to moving anywhere in the world. Or maybe you have reasons that you need to stay in New York, or you want to move to DC, or you want to move to Chicago. And what you ideally want to find is something that like is the Venn diagram of all 3 of those: practice area, subject matter, and location. And what you want to find is what's right in the middle of all those things. Often, particularly early in your career, you have to sacrifice one of those things. And so in doing this exercise of thinking about like what are important to me in these buckets, that will hopefully help you figure out like what you're really set on and what is maybe a little bit more flexible to you. And then finally, it can be a little bit overwhelming looking at international law jobs, right? There's no centralized place, but there are lots of different places you can look. All job applications, all job listings look a little bit different. And so one thing that is really worth your time is to spend some time going through different job descriptions and figuring out what employees are looking for in jobs that you're interested in. So if you're in Counsel now and you know that your goal is to be a researcher at Human Rights Watch, look at 5 Human Rights Watch listings and figure out what are the commonalities, like what are the skills that you need and how can you build them now. And do this for a variety of different job descriptions, both things that you think are sort of within your reach, but also things that are sort of 5 to 7 years of experience out, because you can also use this to build the skills you need to get those jobs that you're going to be interested in eventually. So yeah, I think those are my main pieces of advice. Be involved in international organizations like this, obviously. So be a member of AVILA, be a member of the American Society of International Law, come along to this meeting, to the annual meeting of the American Society of International Law, join committees, join boards where you can, because it's a really fantastic way to meet people. And as many people on this panel have already said, so having those connections, you really never know where the next job opportunity is going to come. And so having a really broad base of connections puts you in a really good position.
Thank you, Jess. And I'm glad that Jess mentioned the United Nations. I received an email shortly before this panel asking me to let the group know about the United Nations Young Professionals Program, which is a program to bring in recent graduates under the age of 32 into the United Nations Secretariat here in New York. It specifically exists to bring underrepresented nationalities in terms of who's already at the Secretariat into the United Nations Secretariat. And for at least part of you in this room, the news is very good. The United States is now considered an underrepresented nationality in the United Nations Secretariat, which it hasn't been for some years. So those of you who are not US nationals, have a look at the list. We know a number of career UN diplomats, civil servants, lawyers, professionals who got their start through IPP from all over the world. With that, I will sum up one of the things that we heard from everybody on this panel, and that is hustle, network. In our field, that is international law in the broadest sense, everybody up here hustled, networked at one time, and everybody you saw over the last 2.5 days was sitting where you were sitting at one point, and they were the ones making the calls and imposing on somebody for those 15 minutes that we've heard mentioned. And it's the only way to do it in our field. There are no established pathways, notwithstanding the title of this panel. They will not be offended, they will not be surprised when law students are contacting them, because it's exactly what they did. At any rate, let's, without objection from the panel, let's throw it open to questions. I see one in the back. Thank you, sir.
I'd like to expand on something David was talking about the presidential management code. I heard many years ago, it's a wonderful program, but there's sharp deadlines when you're eligible, what you have to apply for. You'll elaborate on this. You don't want to say, oh my God, I missed the deadline.
So I can't tell you off the because there have been some deadline changes from COVID, but it's usually in the summer of I'm sorry. There have been some changes recently, but I think one of the things that people usually do is the application period is during either your last year of law, the summer before your last year of law school, or you're eligible up to 2 years after you complete a master's program or a JD program. So for many people, you'll still maintain eligibility at least 2 years after you graduate from whatever program you're currently in that are sitting in this room or watching online. But the application period usually is open for this from sometime in the beginning of the summer through September.
Thank you, Jim. Go ahead in the front.
First of all, I want to thank you for sharing your stories with us. They are really inspiring. And my question is more addressed to you. This is Jessica Peake, because I have a similar academic background to yours, and I recently graduated from NYU with an LLM in International Legal Studies, and I'm doing a fellowship in public interest now at an NGO, and this is the 10th internship I do, and I've moved 3 countries in 5 years. I'm really exhausted, and I really liked what you said about the flexibility and about keeping an open mind. But I wanted to ask you, I'm sure there were times where you felt that you were going to give up and that it was just too much. And I think I'm going through this now because I don't have anything planned for after my fellowship, and I'm struggling to find like a paid internship, because everything I'm doing doesn't pay really well, or is just, and I'm at a point where I would like to have some sort of stability. And my question for you would be, what did you do when you felt that you were going to give up? How did you motivate yourself to keep going?
Great question. I definitely felt like me on numerous occasions. The big reason that I didn't know is that I had no idea what else to do. Like, I truly had no idea. I didn't want to be a non-international lawyer. I did not want to do domestic law. And so I was kind of like, well, I guess I just have to keep doing this until it works out. But I totally understand that, you know, if you're doing a bunch of unpaid or low-paid internship work and you're submitting applications and you're not getting any responses, that it's really, really demoralizing and demotivating. Like, I understand that. I wish there were a culture where at least applications were acknowledged, and if you weren't picked, they told you that. Like, the whole system is really screwed up, that we just leave people hanging and like nobody ever gets responses to anything. So I'm very sympathetic to what you're doing. I mean, I think my advice really though is like, if this is what you want to do, you just have to keep pushing. And I know it can feel very much like you're slamming your head into a wall, but maybe one thing you could do is sort of, if you had these experiences at so many different organizations, is check in with all of them. You know, reach out to them, explain where you're at, explain what you've been doing, and just see if there are open positions. Because again, these people are your networks, right? And so even if they don't necessarily have an opening, just say like, I'm interested in this type of work, maybe in this area, do you have anybody that I can talk to? And you know, there's no guarantee of anything, right? But the more conversations you have, the more people get to know you, the more you get to know your work, the more that people think about you. And just you never know what's going to turn up, right? And like, I understand that is a very unsatisfactory answer, because I'm basically just saying like, sorry, you got to keep going until you get a job. But you're probably much closer than you think you are, right? If you've done all of these internships, if you have finished your master's studies, like you are very well qualified. You've done all of the right things. It's now just a matter of like not losing hope right when you're probably on the cusp of the next thing.
It sounds easy, but it's really not.
I know it's really not easy. I genuinely understand.
I could jump in quickly.
I think that what else you can do is really make a plan and start thinking outside the box a little bit. So if I heard you correctly, you're looking for some sort of stability, probably you want to settle down somewhere and you want to be paid for what you do. You should consider going into private sector, finding the role there that will accommodate your interests. What was mentioned earlier today was pro bono work. That's something that I do a lot of as an attorney at a law firm. And obviously, law firms have only clients that can pay for it, but also law firms in the US take great pride in their work. So maybe you can, network with law firms, find a position as an attorney or as a pro bono coordinator or anyone else that can really keep you close to where your passion is, but keep you close to that. Maybe a little bit different of a role that you were imagining, but that will, sort of, you can sit there and weather the storm, so to speak. And if let's say the market, your opportunity is going to arise in a year, you're not going to give up now. You're going to do something that's very meaningful, and that's going to keep you going.
Can I jump in? I mean, and one thing that I didn't talk about was how I got my job at the DA's office, because it's based on the strength of relationships that I have with former employers. My supervisor, my last internship, was the best friend of the chief of staff at the Brooklyn DA's office, and they needed someone that knew immigration right when Muslim ban happened. And I would encourage you to check in on your former supervisors. And they may not have something in their organization, but the legal world, for all that it is sometimes a very small world. And people know people and know of openings in other places that may be a bit for you.
I'll also jump in here. I haven't talked much about my background, but I did exactly what you're hearing. I ended up taking the job that was offered to me with a law firm. And then segueing from there and staying involved with things like the session with Avila and so on and so forth to pay the bills while I tried to find that first job that I liked. If you're looking for the firms that have that kind of attitude towards pro bono, and if you're looking for the individual lawyers that have that kind of attitude towards keeping one foot in the international sphere, you should look at who's involved in groups like the ABA section on international law, and you should look at which big law firms are involved in groups like PILNET, called International Law Network. Because those are the firms that are not going to gasp and pass out when you say, oh, and by the way, I'd like to be doing some of what I used to be doing, as a pro bono. And look around at who the attorneys and who the firms are that are collaborating with some of the organizations, because they are looking to do more of the same. This is now how a number of law firms compete with each other. Is what cool international projects or what cool pro bono projects Are they doing more relationships? Do they have? And I know it feels like, and it certainly felt like for me, you're putting your dream on hold for a couple of years to pay the bills. And the reason it feels like that is because you are, and because I did. But
But what you're also doing is getting really big training
Yes.
and learning a ton, right? So it's not wasted time. You are learning so much and you're becoming a more marketable lawyer during that time.
other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, you've got a very casual hand raised there. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thanks so much for this really fascinating panel. My question goes into a similar direction. So I'm interested in law firms practicing in the area of public international law, obviously, maybe apart from investment arbitration. So only I would be really interested in if you could maybe name a few law firms that you could recommend, which are like doing a lot in this area, and also whether there are like locations you would recommend. Because my sense is that, I mean, obviously international law firms, but then so for example, I'm from Germany, and like in Europe, I feel there's not as much work being done, or maybe only in Paris and London, and then maybe in New York. So I would be really grateful for any information. Thanks.
Thanks.
You
Um,
got the list.
Yeah, so I do commercial arbitration, that which is an investment treaty arbitration. Is that your?
No, she wants pure public.
Your public, thank you.
ICJ.
Right, so I work for a law firm that does public international law work, and investor state arbitration work as well. I focus personally on investor state arbitration a lot, and I'm based in New York. My colleagues, who handle matters that are very close to heart, meaning disputes between Russia and Ukraine, the public international law field, most of them are based in DC. But I don't think that you should really limit yourself geographically, as we said earlier. I don't think it's really a good idea for us to sort of go and create a short list of law firms. I mean, take a look at this booklet of this conference today. I mean, a lot of them, a lot of those lawyers are either moderating or participating in these conferences. I think it's the research that you need to do. It is for you to do. I would say that you have to find the law firms also using their websites and just checking what people do. A lot of, every law firm is a full service law firm these days. But if you do a bit of research, you're gonna find that, there's not much depth in there. Before I learned how to do what I do today, I knew the market really well. When I went to my first law school in Ukraine, the first thing in the morning in my hand was the latest legal journal and a business journal published that day. And I think that staying on top of developments is one of the greatest things you can do. When I was a student, I contacted lawyers in different law firms. I often flagged some developments in the field that they did not even know about because they're busy with their day-to-day lives. And I was able to sort of use my time as a student to stay on top of things and flag something for them that is going to be interesting. So I invite you to just do that research, look into law firms represented at this conference. And I'm sure you're gonna find the people to talk to, and from there it's sky's the limit.
You're talking about a very small niche, right? Pure public international, doing Jessup for a living, as we call it. I will, for free, tell you what I tell my students who have exactly that niche, which is generally applicable to, say, international commercial arbitration, to slip and fall tort law, to whatever your field is, which is look at the lawyers that are currently doing it. Right, the list of agents and counsel for every case before the ICJ, before ITMOS, is published. Those are the people who are doing it, and it is a vanishingly small number of firms that can actually make money on a regular basis doing that. But it's a known universe. The other one is throw an application at the International Court of Justice. If you've got French and English, if you've got the right languages. I have a lot of friends now who are in that field who got their start clerking at the ICJ or somewhere else within the UN justice and justice adjacent sections.
I will just add, there's, if you want a concrete example, the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes based in Washington, D.C., you go to their website, when you list the cases, you're gonna see all of the counsel listed. There you go.
Other questions? In front again. I'm glad you guys sat in front.
We didn't have a choice, but you asked us. I'm a young law student. I feel like I'm really interested in a lot of different areas of law, criminal justice reform, immigration reform, things of that nature. How important do you think it really is to specialize on one of those versus like broadening your interest and being involved in all kinds of things? And then also as a young person that maybe is interested in policy work, when we see how much up our current world is, how do you get involved in real policy and law at a first job at law school, things like that? Thank you.
So, I mean, I do a lot of policy work, so I can speak to that. I think one of the things that I think is important for lawyers, especially that are interested in policy, is to be grounded in law. Because in policy work, you're also going to compete for jobs with people that don't have law degrees. But you want to bring something to the table that they don't have, and what they don't have usually is a foundation in the law, understanding litigation, understanding like why does it matter that you can defeat a challenge at a summary judgment stage, and why dismissal of that suit so early on it matters tenfold for policy reasons. So I think it's important to have that knowledge, especially in the criminal justice and reform and the immigration reform world. Another important thing to be grounded in is understanding the communities and the populations that you're dealing with. It's one thing to study them, but to actually be involved in the work, like doing pro bono activities. And I think when you're actually going out and talking to employers that are in this field, whether it be, I come from a very different world from, my fellow colleagues on this panel, but a lot of the people that I talk to are the general counsels of, say, Horizon or NILAC, another nonprofit organization. What they really, really care about are people that have dealt with these communities and dealt with these issues in their past. Meaning, so what do I mean by that? Do pro bono work. Do pro bono work to serve the communities that you seek to have gainful employment with.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
I would
Go ahead, Alex.
just briefly in terms of specializing. I see it as if you haven't found that area of law that is your passion already, and I think you haven't because you're asking that question, and I think you should still, maintain this broad spectrum, try different things. In a law firm, a lot of first-year associates come to the law firm even after their summer. They don't really know what they want to be doing. I've seen people start as corporate associates, then shift to doing litigation and vice versa. So I think I had to focus and because I was passionate about it, I wanted to do only this type of work. That's why that sort of guided me. But earlier on in the process, I tried to do as many things as I could. I tried to, keep my options open.
I would just add, I think you said you're still in law school. Try and find ways to try all of these things out while you're in law school. So maybe there's a policy planning at your school, maybe you do an externship, either full-time or part-time, just to test out these different skill sets. Because I think it's really difficult to know until you've tried, and law school is like a fertile ground to do all of the trying.
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't think I know anyone who's now doing what they thought they would do. I think maybe in the culture in London is you're supposed to be open-minded before you start with a law firm, but honestly, all of my friends and colleagues, they all thought they wanted to do one thing and they are now doing something else because of their own choice. So I think the broader you can keep things when you're junior, the better.
Okay. We started about 20 minutes late. It is now about 20 minutes after our scheduled departure. I'm cognizant of our panelists' time.
Why don't we take like
Exactly.
two more questions?
That's what I was gonna suggest is we're also, there's nothing after us at this panel. They wisely put us at the very last thing. So why don't we take a couple more questions, see how exhausted we all are, and then we'll come back in the front here. Go ahead.
My name is Basna Pandey and I'm pursuing my LLM at Georgetown University. So I'm planning to take international project finance course in my next semester. And I was thinking how relevant it is if I want to do international commercial arbitration or investor state arbitration. That are in my game.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant. I mean, well, in my firm, we have a project finance team. And they don't, I mean, we work with them and they help bring in arbitration. So it's useful in that respect, to even know what the other teams are doing. And that, of course, if that then results in an arbitration, then you understand what the actual project is about. And I'm sure the skills that you'll gain in that course will also hopefully help you with whatever law you end up doing. You have to be very flexible in your legal practice, because what you end up doing, even if you end up doing the exact same area that you studied, it will in practice be entirely different. We have to learn completely new facts, completely new sector oftentimes with every case we take on. So if you're interested in it, I think that's really the key question. I would say do it. So yeah, that's something for it to me.
Standing, yes, you did. And strolling now, not just approaching us.
Thank you very much for all the advice. I'm always interested in where experts are plugged in to get the news and developments within their field. So I was wondering if maybe give a few recommendations of journals or blogs or other sources of information that we could follow.
So I read a lot of blogs. I would really recommend following the public international law and human rights issues, particularly, which is my interest area. I read the New Juris, Just Security, Lawfare, the AJO blog, the EJL, European Journal of International Law blog, and then a few sort of more specific human rights and, well, a couple of IHL specific blogs. So if you're interested in international humanitarian law, there's a fantastic blog called JibJab that is run by this guy, Greg Martin, who was moderating the panel on the environment and security earlier today. So those places I think are really, really helpful. And many of them have like corresponding podcasts as well.
What does everybody else read? Go ahead.
I mean, I would make a plug for SCOTUS blog. I don't know if anyone uses SCOTUS blog. It is such a fantastic tool. For me, I mean, every term there's a couple of immigration and criminal justice related type cases. There's always huge immigration cases on SCOTUS blog. They do a great job of breaking down those issues. So I strongly encourage SCOTUS blog.
There's a lot being published about international arbitration in general, investor state law in particular, and as you start researching, you will find that it's a very dynamic field where there are a lot of controversial issues and a lot of what I call propaganda against investor state dispute settlement. But there are a lot of people who strongly feel that, you know, that system is not doing the right thing, and I could not disagree more. But the things I read, I mentioned earlier, is Global Arbitration is a great resource. And as law students, at least when I was a law student at NYU Law, I had free access to that website. You should really use your time in law school to follow all of those resources. There's the Investor State Arbitration Report. When you go broader, there's Kluber Arbitration Law, which has been around for a couple of decades by now, I think. And you can always do your research there. So it also is important to just stay on top of what's going on in the world, because when you read the resources I just mentioned, that means that that's already a done deal, and there's a case, there's a dispute, and there are people working on it. That's important for your job search, but also try to follow current events generally, what's going on in the world, because half a year ago, I as a Ukrainian was a much happier person, and as you know by now, we all live in a world where we're asking ourselves where are the nuclear weapons going to be used tomorrow or not. We're in a very disturbing place. In international law is kind of needs to provide answers that so far have not been provided. So I don't think that you have to really limit yourself. Try to focus on things that are just going on in the world and try to anticipate where the next need is going to be. What is the field that is going to need your skills?
Yeah, I think Alex has hit the main ones, but what I would say is when you're actually working as whether an intern or you've got your first job, make sure you read the actual case. And I cannot tell you how infuriating it is if you get a summary that is wrong and wrong because the blog is wrong. You can't trust others to read the case for you. So just don't make that mistake.
I would make one other plug, and I mean, this is a bit nerdy, but it's something I do. The courts, the federal circuit courts have been great on actually publishing and putting their oral arguments online, whether in person or through audio. I listen to them in the background. You'll see every single, like the Ninth Circuit, I think is the best because they have the video and audio and they have the case. So whether it be, I don't know anything about international arbitration, but I'm sure that they'll have it like circuit arguments in the Ninth Circuit about that. You can actually listen to the oral arguments and listen to the briefing and see how the judges are receptive or not receptive to some arguments. It's something I strongly recommend.
Yeah, one of my colleagues has a podcast on arbitration station, so that could be an easy one to cover.
And to pull that back into the advice you received before, once you find, especially some of these niche blogs, contact the author, contact the editor, because they are looking to produce content. And I also have former students who have gotten their foot in the door by writing for some of these self-same sites that you've heard about, because they're always looking for more content. And if you are willing to invest the time in the field and author, well, and now your name is out there. And so it all hopefully becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that your name is out there, therefore your name is out there, therefore you've got the job, therefore you're.
I just want to echo what Michael said. You're all writing papers in law school all the time. Most of them are probably pretty contemporary and addressing issues that make perfect law material. So what you need to do is think about how do I transform this into an 800 to 1,000 word piece, and you do that by looking at the the instructions that each blog provides, which are very clear submission guidelines, and submit it to you can only do one at a time, but it's much easier to get published that way than to try and have a law review comment or something published, which is much longer, a much lengthier process and more competitive.
And nobody reads those anyway.
I want to add something very quickly, which is not really an answer to your question, but I felt the need to raise this. This is a great conference that welcomes the students. Most of the other conferences that I attended, they want you to pay for it. So I encourage you to do what I did back in the days, reach out to the organizers, ask them to audit the conference, ask for volunteering opportunities. A lot of them need people to come the night before and help arrange the booklets and all the materials. So be proactive and demand access to those conferences, demand access to practitioners. Practitioners do want to meet you as well. Don't let that discourage you when you see this $1,000 fee to attend a conference. Do your best to be there. And if they don't allow you to, team up with a young arbitrators or young international law organization and set up your own event that happens the next day and invite people speaking at that conference as speakers to your event.
Good. And I will also say, and this is a great segue of mine, and also contact ILSA. Most of your campuses have an international law society or a chapter of ILSA. One of the reasons why you are here and you're in here is because ILSA has been fighting for this to happen for literally 35 years. And we learned that and they love it, by the way. Can you imagine how empty this would have been had all of these people not been filling seats? This is good for the organization. It's good for you, it's good for the international legal community. So do give us a call at ILSA and say, hey, here's a conference that we'd like to attend. There must be other students. And then we come at them with the power of numbers. And we say, our phones are ringing off the hook. Can we get a deal? Can we volunteer to, 30 years ago, that desk upstairs where you registered and whatnot was run by ILSA. And that was how we got our foot in the door at International Law Weekend, so that students could attend and be welcomed and so on and so forth. So let's keep doing that, and again, this is the kind of place, as I said at the beginning, this is the kind of place you want to be, because the people you want to hire you are on the panels, they're sitting in the audience next to you, and so on and so forth. So let's keep those doors open. In the back.
So how can you combine your preference for remote work as opposed to in-person work? Do they develop a career in the national law, or is it a career killer? Most of the time.
I don't think it's a career killer at all. I think there's a lot of opportunities for remote work. But it's going to very much depend on the practice that people are interested in, right? Like it's going to be harder to do litigation work remotely for a long time, but there's other types of legal work that are much easier to do remotely. And I think a lot of organizations, as we've all seen, are sort of adapting to this somewhat post-pandemic world that we live in and offering many more remote opportunities. I know that I certainly see a way more remote jobs out there than I ever did before. So I mean, I think they exist. There's going to be competition for them, obviously, because it's easier to have a remote job and not have to uproot your life and move somewhere else, but they're certainly out there.
I think with international law firms, big law firms, it's going to be very challenging. If I think close to impossible to be 100% remote, but sort of hybrid options are available. Certainly during the pandemic, we were all remote, but right now the trend is going back to the offices. And from highly recommended, it's shifting towards mandatory. In my law firm, we have to be in the office 3 days a week, and starting January, those days are going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, which works for me because typically I work from home on Mondays and Fridays, and I think that really helps you do a lot of things you need to do, with family. But I don't see the opportunity to just, especially as a young lawyer, to come in, because a lot of what you need to get from the law firm is just to get it through people, being close to them, working with them, teams. It's all teamwork. So I think you will be disadvantaged if you are going to learn and try to do that remotely. But if that's your only option, then I agree, you should continue to look for those opportunities. I think that we are in a different world now. It's pandemic, a lot of things will need to change.
And that's going to be especially true of entry-level lawyers. They don't know you yet. A lot of firms have some flexibility with partners, with associates that have been there and so on and so forth. But for entry-level, they don't know you yet. Remember also that our field, not international law, but law, is extremely conservative to the point of old-fashioned when it comes to business model, labor model, so on and so forth. We have been the last to adjust to just about every trend in the last 30 years. So even as we see other fields adopting more flexible work models, law firms, especially big law, especially traditional law firms, especially firms that stood the test of time, really are looking to get back to what they laughingly call normal at some point in the future. Whereas other industries, a number of other industries have said, either there is a new normal or there is no normal post-COVID. So I agree with Alex. Very difficult, and you'll have to adopt some flexibility on some of those other axes that were identified earlier.
Can I just say something?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
Please.
so I've probably talked to most of you today. I was upstairs with ABA. And so we actually have our meeting in the spring. It's going to be at the Sheraton Times Square. And we're actually looking for student volunteers.
So if you want to volunteer, you can serve as a rapporteur, or you can help it set up, and in exchange, you get to attend the conference free. So you can network with the speakers, you can help us with picking program notes for the program. We're also looking for students to help with reaching out for attendance and marketing the conference, which is a good way to make connections as you're trying to build your professional network. And we're also looking for student leaders in our committees. We have 50+ committees, and you can work on policy, all the things that the speakers have been talking about, you can do there. So definitely, if you want to do something, if you want to build that network, get involved in the section.
And I did that for work, and I'm an LLM student. Yeah.
Oh, awesome, thank you. There's also something called Passports to Practice. It's about I forget how long, 6-week-long course. It was really awesome. We were able to interact with a lot of students from across the globe and learn a lot of great things and hear a lot of great perspectives. It's always better to hear stuff from more than one person. So there's a lot of free courses on Coursera as well. You can start reaching out. There's more courses than you realize. Washington Council of Lawyers does a lot of events as well. And then I do have a question for Attorney Park. You don't mind sharing a little bit about why you elected not to pursue your PhD? I was just curious. And also you're amazing.
She is amazing.
You stand back here.
Thanks, Anna. So it just wasn't the right choice for me. I didn't go into it with the right motivations, I think. And ultimately, I didn't pick a subject that I was interested in enough. And so also I have some pretty critical things to say about SGD programs generally, because they don't pay you anything, and like how do you sustain your life if you don't have any money? So there's also that. So I also was working full time the whole time, which really doesn't leave a lot of space to think and do research. But that's basically it.
One other thing, no one has really talked about using LinkedIn as a tool to make connections, but you should reach out to your network and look for informational interviews. Look for people who do what you want to do and try to connect with them and see if they'll talk to you. But you definitely need to be on LinkedIn, have a strong profile. When you meet somebody, connect with them on LinkedIn, follow them. Post about, interesting things.
Agreed. I would just probably caution you about contacting people on LinkedIn, and the kind of people probably receive about 50 connection requests a day. In my experience, that was not really useful. But that being said, having a profile on LinkedIn, if you're fine with that, with the social media presence, it's a controversial issue. Some people, I have a profile on there, and I've been connected to a lot of people. That helps me when I met some people when I was in Europe, and now that I travel back, I sometimes go to LinkedIn and see, okay, who's based in Milan, where I'm going for Thanksgiving, right? And I want to reconnect with the people that I haven't seen in a number of years. So I do think it's a very useful resource, but use caution when you reach out to people. I don't think that just adding them to your network and asking them to give you a job is a good idea.
And I think if you're writing a blog post and putting it on LinkedIn, I've heard that it should be 300 words or less, because it tells you how many minutes it takes to read, and the people are less likely to read a longer article. So post a short one about content.
And with LinkedIn, particularly for students, you don't have a bio anywhere on the internet, right? Like you're not affiliated, you don't have like a work bio anywhere. So LinkedIn can play that role for you. That is where you can put your prior experience at volunteer positions or internships, externships, and leadership roles that you had. So treat it like that. Don't have too much detail in there, but at least let it give potential employees a sense of who you are and the type of work that you've done, while you don't have an active bio.
All right.
Well, with that, I know we are now at the point where people have to start getting to spaces. I see some of you shifting seats. So I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank our organizers. I'd like to thank everybody safe home and